Welcome, friends. Welcome to our friends online. You are with us. There they are. My name is Frances Kramer, and I'm joining you from Pendle Hill on Lenape land on what is now Wallingford, Pennsylvania. As many of you know, since 1930, Pendle Hill has been an experiment in spiritual learning community. It is a joy to see our leaders, our alumni, and those who are new to us joining us here tonight. I'm going to start with a few brief technical orientation pieces. I'm joined tonight in the barn by Maddie Rose and Lucas Meyer-Lee, who are assisting with tech. If you have any technical difficulties or questions tonight, please message Pendle Hill Tech Support, and they'll do their best to support you. We, as always, are especially grateful to the Friends Foundation for the Aging, whose support allows us to continue making our First Monday lecture series and other online offerings free to friends of all ages. You may have noticed that we are live streaming this video to our YouTube channel, Pendle Hill USA. Only those speaking will be live streamed. In the coming days, we will send out a link to the recording along with resources from tonight. We've enabled live transcription, so you're able to access closed captioning. At the end of the lecture, we will have an opportunity to share question and answer. Friends, every First Monday lecture finds us in a unique historical moment. Tonight is no exception. We are continuing tonight a conversation that began almost 95 years ago here at Pendle Hill, and we plan to be here again for the first Monday of December, continuing to turn towards each other in challenging times, learning how to build the beloved community together. But for tonight, we give thanks for being here together now. We are blessed to be joined by two friends, leaders, and staff members of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, who will be sharing on the theme, Towards a Just Democracy, Spiritual Grounding and Principled Action. Alicia McBride serves as FCNL's Senior Director for Quaker Leadership, where she focuses on connecting Quaker faith, practice, and community to policy advocacy in Washington, D.C. Her roles and more than 20 years of work at FCNL are united by a concern for how to act with integrity at the place where faith and the world meet. She is a member of Sandy Spring Friends Meeting, Baltimore Yearly Meeting, assistant clerk of the Earlham School of Religion Board of Advisors, a parent to two teenagers with her husband, Sam Garman, and a yoga teacher. José Santos Moreno is the director for justice reform at FCNL. He seeks to make structures in the U.S. more just and less oppressive by eliminating gun violence, reducing mass incarceration, and building a truly equitable democracy. He has 13 years of policy experience and 3 years as a social worker, giving him a full grasp of how much work there is to do. José is also working on his fourth language, as he is already trilingual. He does not like to admit it, but his wife, Dejanae, is funnier than him. He is a sneakerhead and a spotty runner working on his first marathon. He is in the process of transferring his membership to Homewood Friends Meeting, Baltimore Yearly Meeting, and has been a foster parent now to 13 children. We are so grateful that you two have joined us, and I will invite us now into worship, and our speakers will speak to us from the silence. As we begin, I actually invite you to stay in this place of worship for a few more moments. And notice what's happening in your physical body. Notice your breath. Maybe deepen it. Notice what you sense in the room around you. maybe what you hear, what you feel. And from that place of awareness, bring to mind an experience where you felt safe, loved, relaxed, calm. Imagine it in as much detail as you can. Are you with people or are you by yourself? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? For these few moments, be in that situation as much as you can. Then I invite you to return to the room that you're in. Maybe open your eyes if they were closed. And notice how you feel. Do you feel more calm, more present? When I do even a simple grounding exercise like this, it feels like my thoughts are moving slower, like I have more space to think before I react. So on this election eve, I invite you to think about what practices and activities help you access this kind of place. And find time and space to do some of them. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, over the next few weeks. At FCNL's staff meeting earlier today, we were invited to share words that described what we were feeling in this moment. People shared words like hope and fear, uncertainty, anxious, tension, nauseously optimistic. And many people shared both of the difficult word and the hopeful word at the same time. Right now, there's a lot of stress, anxiety, unknowns, speculations. And Jose and I don't know what is going to happen. So if you're going to write that on your card, don't think again. What we can do is help you prepare for what will be needed on election day, what comes after, and in the long-term effort to work towards a just democracy in the United States. So I'll begin by talking about how important it is to consider how each of us is showing up. Our ability to be reflective and resilient, to notice and question our own habits, to practice the spiritual discipline of loving our neighbor as ourselves without exception, is fundamental to any change we want to bring to our larger political system. Then Jose will share some about that larger change work. Where are we starting from? What needs to change? And where are the openings? How do we both recognize the many, many flaws in our political system and processes and continue to work with hope? And then I'll wrap things up with some final reflections on what it means to work toward a just democracy. And periodically we'll pause and invite you to reflect on some theories on these topics. But I want to start by asking you to consider how you're showing up in this system of our democracy in our country. And I would say that in order to change the system, which most of us would agree we need to do, it means we have to change how we show up in it. So the first time I was at Pendle Hill was last March. I was here for the Beyond Diversity 101 workshop with Mia Newspan and Lisa Grafstein. And one of the things that we started with in that workshop was these concentric circles. You start with yourself, and then the group, and then the society. And so much of that workshop, I think we all came in wanting to change society. And so much of that workshop was about how do you change yourself? Democracy, election integrity, peace building, these all exist as the sum of what we do as individuals. We may not be able to single-handedly change these systems and institutions, but we can't change them without giving attention to ourselves and our role in them. So let's consider for a moment what happens when we attend to our inner selves, like we did at the very beginning of this talk. There are lots of descriptions or language from different disciplines.
So neurologists, physiologists talk about how exercise, meditation, visualization, yoga, contemplative practices change what parts of your brain are active, that you're better able to control your thoughts and your actions, that you can access your parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest part of ourselves that conveys a sense of safety. From a psychological perspective, therapists talk about this as accessing wise mind, calm, resourceful states where we can respond rather than react. Spiritually, from our own Quaker tradition, William Tabor in the Pendle Hill pamphlet, 4 Doors to Meeting for Worship, talks about the first of the doors being the door before, how we can find times of spiritual nourishment in many aspects of our life. He describes the experience of worship as entering a divine stream, one that is available to us at any time. He said, "I once thought worship was something I do, but for many years now it has seemed as if worship is actually a state of consciousness that I enter, so that I am immersed into a living, invisible stream of reality, which has always been present throughout all history. Each day is filled with countless opportunities for going through the door before, for dipping into brief moments of communion with that eternal yet ever-present stream." So a thread throughout this talk is going to be drawing on common truths from different traditions and disciplines and sources of knowledge as a way of giving us something solid to build from at a time that seems precarious. I believe that when things converge from so many different directions, it is a sign that we are all accessing the same divine stream, even if the exact way we describe it differs. So from this place of attention and grounding, as we consider these larger questions of democracy, justice, and politics, we might start to notice that we're telling ourselves a story about the systems themselves and about our roles in them. And depending on the kind of story we tell, we might feel energized and able to engage with hope, or we might teeter closer to despair. As Jose is going to talk about later, we are not advocating for toxic positivity. We need to be clear-eyed in understanding the problems in our system. But even from that knowledge, our stories matter. We need to know how much of the world is burning to be able to give to that world the love it needs. Is our story that these systems are hopeless, that there's nothing we can do? When we feel powerless, we can lash out in frustration and anger, or withdraw and disengage. We can shut down. Engaging in this project of working towards a just democracy means telling ourselves a different story, one that recognizes all the choices we have and the ways we can make a difference, not just focus on the places we can't. As the yoga teacher and professor Deborah Adele writes about when she's describing the practice of ahimsa, or nonviolence, she says, "We all have the choice to tell a different story and grow ourselves up to take responsibility for our lives in a new and fresh way." Maybe our story is that these problems are too big, too intimidating, beyond us to solve. So in 2017, at FCNL Spring Lobby Weekend, which is a conference that brings young people from all over the country to DC to lobby, then Representative Keith Ellison spoke to the group. And he talked about how congressional buildings are meant to be intimidating. And I would say the whole process of engaging with our political system is meant to be intimidating. And he said, the important thing is not to let it, to remember that you are part of this and not to give in. There are all these signals that say you don't belong. And part of our discipline and work is not to accept that story and to claim our power in the system. When FCNL trains people how to lobby, when we say, here's your roadmap, it's actually pretty easy. You just follow these steps and then you go into the visit. That is how we are able to think creatively and prophetically and move closer to that world we seek. Is our story that we don't have a part to play, or that nothing can happen until some other group of people change, maybe to be more like us? Emily Province, in an interview with Friends Journal, said that the most common misperception Quakers have about election violence in all its forms, and many other things, is that it's someone else's fault, and we can't do anything about it. We're outside the problem. Many of you are probably familiar with the group Braver Angels, which has a mission of bringing Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. And they have focused a lot on this issue of polarization, on how divided our country is, how we got there, and how we can change. And they talk about how our instinct to connect to those who are more like us leads us to generalize and then isolate ourselves from those other people. It can lead us to tell a story that some people are less than human. And that's when we start getting into real trouble. And if your thoughts go right to, but that's just it, those other people think about a group, are thinking that about a group I care about. They just need to realize they're wrong. Consider that someone has to be the first to work against this cycle of separation, stereotyping, and polarization. What are you assuming about those other people? What do you know about them from your own experience, not just what you've read on Facebook? Knowing that it's very hard to change other people, but we can change ourselves, what is one way you could give yourself a role in this story that doesn't push us further away from each other? So the first query I have to offer is, what story are you telling yourself about this moment and about your role in it? So far, I've named some of those less than helpful stories that we tell ourselves, the kinds that encourage us to feel powerless. The good news is we can change those stories. We can recognize and acknowledge the active role we can play in what happens in our community, country, and democracy. Changing the story doesn't change the facts or magically make things work out. Our democracy and election systems still have a lot of problems. But changing our sense of agency in those systems can make a difference in how we approach them. There are lots of practical and tactical reasons to make these shifts for our own mental health, to be more effective, to address social problems that we might see. But where I want to focus is on the spiritual dimension of this, especially when it comes to the ways we relate to other people, those we agree with about many things and those we don't, those we are inclined to be sympathetic with, and those we think of as the problem. As we consider our role in these systems, we are invited to engage in the spiritual practice of loving our neighbor without exception. So I want to start by talking about this word love. We pack a lot of meaning into that one little word. I sometimes think the Greeks have the right idea, separating different kinds of love in their language. For example, eros is romantic love, agape, unconditional or selfless love, philia, friendship, xenia, hospitality. But when you think of it, in English, we have those distinctions too. We talk about infatuation, empathy, compassion, fondness, devotion, adoration. The word love comes with a hint, maybe an aftertaste of all of those flavors. Love doesn't mean just one thing. So when people dismiss this idea of love as a central aspect of anything, including changing our laws, our policies, our political system, it's often because they assume the most extreme meaning possible, that love is just pure emotion. Love is not necessarily weak, or passive, or naive. People see it as touchy-feely, in contrast with the intellectual rigor and rationality that we need to solve big problems. And I can definitely find myself doing the same thing. For example, in thinking about this, I was reading William Penn's very famous quote, let us then try what love will do, for if men did once see we love them, we should soon find they would not harm us. And I found myself rolling my eyes. Really, love conquers all. Is this a faith tradition or a romance novel? Plenty of harm has been done by the people we love, A moment that changed my perspective was when I heard a sermon many years ago in an Episcopal church where The minister was talking about this idea of loving your neighbor, and he said, Jesus' invitation to love your neighbor is like an invitation to love your sibling. You don't have to like them. It was a moment. Love can be, but is not necessarily about uncritical acceptance or complete vulnerability to another person. It can be about what all your other interactions rest on. And there's an important role for boundaries. Robert Frost said, good fences make good neighbors. There's something to that. More directly, Prentice Hemphill, the organizer, writer, and healer, says, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. So how are we to think about this invitation to love our neighbors? What kind of love are we talking about, especially in this moment? For me, this invitation becomes more actionable, more possible, when I start substituting other words in for love. Have compassion for your neighbor, without exception. Care about your neighbor, without exception. Act as if your life and your neighbors are intertwined, without exception. To be more specific, have compassion for your neighbor who is voting for Donald Trump, and show care to your neighbor who is scared about this election outcome. Have compassion to your neighbor who is voting for Kamala Harris, and show care to your neighbor who doesn't think their vote matters. I don't mean that there are no differences between these people, or that you should excuse or validate their choice. But even believing that some of them are wrong, can you still feel love towards them? I believe that this way of relating to our neighbors, not just our friends or our families or people we have chosen, but the random people we happen to be placed in this world with, gives us a foundation from which to act and moves us towards a more just democracy. As Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. But don't just take my word for it. This is another one of those places where the wisdom of many, many different traditions comes together. In the book of Mark, Jesus is asked what the greatest commandment is, and he answers, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. This also shows up in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. In the Mahabharata, in Hinduism, this is the sum of duty. Do not unto others what you would not have them do unto you. This also shows up in the Quran, and even George Fox has his version. In a 1656 letter to ministers, he wrote, which many of you may be familiar with, be patterns, be examples in all countries, places, islands, nations, wherever you come, that your carriage in life may preach among all sorts of people, and to them, that you will come to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God and everyone. This feels like another case where many people seem to be tapping into the same divine stream and bringing a similar message out of those living waters. So how do we do that? Well, we do it by recognizing that this is a spiritual practice, something we get better at by doing it. It's a spiritual muscle that we strengthen, maybe even giving particular attention to those we find the most difficult. Also in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, we are told to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. In Buddhism, there is a meditation known as metta, or loving kindness, where the invitation is to imagine a series of people or beings and speak a heartfelt desire for their happiness, health, safety, and freedom from suffering. You're invited to consider someone you love unconditionally, as well as someone you have a hard time with, as well as yourself. Sometimes that self part can be one of the hardest parts of loving your neighbor as yourself. And in our Quaker practices, we hold people in light. We experiment with light. We look for and speak to that of God in another person. So as we move into Election Day and beyond, how might you practice extending love, care, compassion to others, whether you approve of their actions or are sympathetic to them or not? We also love our neighbors by recognizing that the power of doing so, of having compassion for them, comes not because it changes someone else or guarantees a better outcome, but because it changes us and the role we're prepared to play. I really love Sandra Cronk's description of this, writing about the peace testimony. In Peace Be With You, a study of the spiritual basis of the Friends' peace testimony. She says, God's love may not be reduced to a technique to bring people around to your own point of view. God's love, like the sunshine and the rain, is poured out on the just and the unjust alike. The peace testimony does not assume naively that love will bring an immediate transformation in the hostile one. In fact, the decision to act in love may increase the aggression of the adversary, who now sees a chance to overpower us. Moving from a place of love may not be practical. It may not be effective. And yet, it is what so many faith traditions, including our own, calls us towards. The Friends United meeting newsletter in this fall has featured a number of friends writing about their thoughts on the US election. And Fritz Weiss from Portland Friends meeting summed up many of these directions, saying that I suggest that what these times require of us is our imagination, that we know our convictions, that we act with humbleness, that we hope without attachment to outcome, and that we love. We love our neighbors without exception from a place of listening and humility. We're not trying to fix others or project our own ideas, what they need, onto them. You can love someone even when they make decisions you don't agree with or understand. And we can also love ourselves well enough not to enable those choices in ways that compromise our own sense of integrity. And we do it by recognizing that we can love someone and still not like them, still not endorse their point of view, still hold them accountable for the harm they might do. We can work relentlessly to defeat a political candidate, or stop a policy, or oppose a war, and still be moved by an act of love for those we are working against. So what does it look like to love our neighbors without exception as we work towards a just democracy? I'll give two examples. So in a congressional visit, if you are lobbying for the Freedom to Vote Act, which is one of the pieces of legislation José will talk about in just a moment, if you are a constituent visiting with a Republican member of Congress who has spoken out against this bill, how does the call to love your neighbor without exception show up in this situation? Part of it is what story you're telling in that visit. The story of what you love enough, this country, the people in it, the ideals of our electoral system, to upend your schedule, maybe travel some distance, talk to someone you don't expect to agree with you. When we talk at FCNL about storytelling and lobbying, there are lots of directions you can take, but fundamentally they come down to some version of telling the story of what you love enough to be in that room. But what about the person you're meeting with? What does extending love, compassion, and care look like? You can do both at once. Former legislative director Ruth Flower talks about how when she would go into a lobby visit, she would remind herself that God was in the room and in herself and in the people she was meeting with. Can you see people who disagree with you not as an obstacle or an opposition to love manifesting, but a part of love's intricate weaving? Let's think about it on election day and what comes out. So no matter what happens, some group of people is going to be upset, angry, shocked, frustrated. Maybe all of us will feel some version of that. Some people might be afraid, some people might be jubilant. So I come back to that earlier question. What practices keep you grounded and centered, connected to your capacity to show up as your best self? The more we practice, the more it will feel possible to have love and compassion for those who feel differently than us, as well as those who do and agree with us, and to manifest the complexity of that love and add to what is available in the whole system. We need to make wise and compassionate choices, act for love of all our neighbors, find those opportunities to enter the door before and connect with the divine stream, acting from that love in the cause of justice. So this kind of love is a far cry from the passive, fluffy hearts and rainbows kind. This kind of love is fierce. It's heartbreaking. It is messy and infinite and complicated. It is a practice we are working on our whole lives, not just a rule we follow or a series of rituals that we enact. This kind of love takes us out of our comfortable categorizations and desire for certainty. It can lead us to live lives of service to others and to be curious about others' experiences. This kind of love asks us to challenge the perception that love is a scarce and finite commodity. Love is not oil or money or whatever other resource we guard and trade in this late stage of capitalism. Love is, in the words of the Malvina Reynolds song, a magic penny. Love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. As an aside, I've now had that song stuck in my head for like 2 weeks. This kind of love is also unpopular and much easier to tell other people to do better than it is to live ourselves. In that same Friends Journal article I mentioned earlier, Emily Providence talks about how finding and advocating for a third way, which doesn't entirely line up with one faction or another, is often antagonizing to everyone. And we know this instinctively. It is so satisfying to our brains to find patterns and make meaning from them. It's so much easier to categorize people, feel like we don't have to bother with them if we don't like them. It feels good to organize and sort and dismiss, and it takes energy to find another way, energy we may not always feel like we have, especially if that way is not being upheld or affirmed by the people and society around us. I've talked about the importance of personal spiritual practice, but this is also a place for the importance of Quaker community. At their best, these communities can support and challenge us to show up in our bigger systems in helpful ways, through spiritual nurture, discernment, and support in decisions that might not match the expectations of our broader society. They can support us in making choices, like love, that to the wider world seems strange or naive. Speaking for myself, I often find the attempt to love all my neighbors to be deeply uncomfortable and humbling. I think this is part of why I'm a Quaker. I know how hard it is, and I find that by choosing to surround myself with people and perspectives that call me back to this again and again and again, is why I want to hang out with you all. So I invite you tonight, tomorrow, in the weeks and months ahead, as you encounter people in your life, online, in the news, and are challenged to regard that person from a place of love, ask these queries and listen to what emerges. What will move you most towards love? What does it look like in this moment to act from a place of love?
You just heard about the importance of love and focus. Hello? Wow. Hello, can you hear me? No.
Actually, this showing the works is there.
Oh,
there
maybe it's a jacket that wants to be free. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. This is really a joy, and I really mean that. I initially thought that conversations on the Hill and lobbying Congress was the best part, and the wonky details, but this is actually the best part, speaking to friends and, speaking about these issues with people, just like you and me. So I really appreciate being here. You just heard about the importance of love and purpose. And I have to apologize, I'm gonna start off with the dazzler and then move into the technical. And I promise end with a message of hope and leaving you with some homework. So some good stuff at the end. So stick around. It's regularly overlooked or left in history books the fact that we live in the wealthiest nation that was built off the backs of Black men and women stolen from Africa and subjected to the ugliest human rights abuses you can imagine. And I'll just highlight that these aren't just abuses that lasted for the period of time of this ugliness, but lives on in structures, in our bodies, in our trauma, generational trauma. This still lives with us today. Women got the right to vote in 1920 with passage of the 19th Amendment. And although it technically covered all women, Black women, Indigenous women, Asian American women, women from many races and ethnicities, and women with disabilities faced discrimination and oppression, limiting the exercise of this franchise. It took all the way until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 for everyone to get the right to vote. This is in spite, and I want to highlight this is in spite of the fact that Black women had been integral to the suffrage movement from the beginning. Today, we might not be stopping Black people at the county clerk and asking them to count bubbles on a bar of soap, but we absolutely don't have free and fair elections. We have historically been a nation distrustful of centralized authority. Therefore, most of our elections are administered at the state and local level. I wish I had the exact number, but I believe we have something in the realm of about 10,000 elections, from sheriffs, county clerks, prosecutors, judges, senators, representatives. There's a lot of elections and very decentralized. We might have the appearance to many that our elections are fair, but sadly that's untrue. The unfairness and restrictiveness of elections hide in their complexity. Let me run through a few examples. Before I start, I want to share that I am not a lawyer who specializes in election law. These laws and situations may have changed. They're constantly changing. That's part of the problem. One example of how oppression can hide in complexity is voter caging, and this is popular in Ohio. Voter caging is essentially the county clerk or the registrar sending you a postcard, which you then must return to confirm that you are a voter at that address. What that doesn't say is if you're serving in the military, if you're living abroad, or you change address, they will not try very hard to find you. So what you can find is an unfortunate surprise. You show up to vote on election day, you are not registered to vote. There's also the problem of Native communities in the Dakotas. There are tribes that don't have addresses like you or I do. They rely on P.O. boxes. So what they've done is, and this may have changed, is they say that P.O. boxes are insufficient to register to vote, thereby restricting your access to the ballot box. Many voting precincts across the country have been shut down, and the reasoning given is for cost. There's one precinct that stays in my mind, and it's in Randolph County, Georgia. they closed the polling place for an area that was almost entirely black, and they said that it was because of cost. Again, complexity, oppressing people, stopping them from voting. There's a number of barriers across many states stopping people from being able to vote by mail or by absentee. Up until the pandemic, some states that had this available to you required a reason. You couldn't just vote by mail because you wanted to. You had to be a senior with limited mobility, you live abroad. You have to have a reason. But there are more serious ways of stopping people from exercising the right to vote. One of them is, again, staying with Georgia, exact match. So, if your name on your driver's license doesn't exactly match your voter registration, they will say that this is not the same person, this is duplicative, this is fraudulent, and they'll just take you out of the votes, right out of the voter rolls, and then you can't vote. And I believe they don't even notify you that you've been removed. There's everybody's favorite, gerrymandering. This is a way of creatively and usually favoring the person who's elected in that district. Making it so that it's very favorable to that party and minority voices don't have a voice. And one district that comes to mind for me is around the suburbs of Chicago. It looks like a vice grip in that Democratic district. There are districts in North Carolina, in Texas, that look like an amoeba with a straw. It makes no sense. But these are ways that you slice up the electorate and make it less representative of people who actually live there. And then my personal favorite, because I think that there's just so many ways that it leaves people out, and that's the sickening sums of money in campaigns, crowding out our voices. The average House campaign, which again, those were my last every 2 years, when I started FCNL, was around $1.3 million. Average. There are very many that go way above that. Today, well, not today, but as of 2022, the average cost of a winning House campaign was $2.79 million. And this is just declared donations directly to a candidate. I'm not talking about independent expenditures, super PACs, like you probably heard of Elon Musk starting up a super PAC with $75 million. Just gave Donald Trump $75 million. Well, no, he didn't. He created a super PAC loosely tied to the effort of electing Donald Trump because you cannot coordinate directly with the candidate. So I'm not talking about independent expenditures. I'm just talking about direct contributions that are declared. And then for the United States Senate, when I started FCNL about 8 or so years ago, the average could be a lot higher. Average cost of a winning Senate campaign was $10 million. As of 2022, most recent data, the average winning Senate campaign raised $26.53 million. This is how so many people get left out. Most regular people might make a $25 or $50 donation. Not a lot of people making the maximum $5,000 for a candidate committee for a PAC, or I believe it's $2,600 for a primary and then for a general. Normal people aren't donating these sums of money. They're just not. And that leaves out the fact that only a minority of Americans actually donate to campaigns to begin with. So the cost of elections leaves so many people out. And it's a way that the wealth and the powerful continue to perpetuate their agenda when regular people, middle class, and powerful people get left behind. The coalitions that I work with want Democratic trifecta. Basically, what that means is a Democratic House of Representatives, Democratic Senate, and Kamala Harris in the White House. That's in order to be able to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The Freedom to Vote Act fixes many of these issues that I mentioned, in addition to making election day a federal holiday. And this isn't everything it does a lot more. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the complexity in our system being a big part of the problem. So it is an omnibus bill. So this is a very big bill with a lot of committee goes inside of it, to try to get at more fair, free elections. Now, the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which was renamed after the passing of the great John R. Lewis, that tries to remedy what the Supreme Court did in essentially rendering almost ineffective the Voting Rights Act. And it changes the pre-clearance formula. So basically, certain areas of the country with known histories of limiting and restricting the right to vote, especially to minority communities, had to pre-clear changes to their election laws through the Department of Justice. It used to be a regional formula, certain parts of the country, and what the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act does is it creates a judicial nexus. So if there have been a certain number of cases and lawsuits in the federal courts, this bill now, if passed, would require those areas to pre-clear any changes. Now, regardless of who occupies the White House or the makeup of Congress, we should still strive to point out the very many inefficiencies in our systems and work to change them. A lot can happen at the state and local level as well. I want to give credit to the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights in their work for voting rights, for giving me and giving many of us who do this work an incredibly elegant phrase. We are building a US as good as its ideals. We've never had it. This country has never attained the aspirations of its founding doctrine. Each generation, we make it better. Love can help us, as we've heard in the last speaker, can help us mend society and improve our systems. I want to leave you with some hope, like I promised. Because there is hope. I want to start with my path. My path to Quakerism is non-traditional. A simple way to look at my path is that I got the Quaker starter pack. Unitarian Universalism. The short story is that I learned of Quakerism as a policy fellow for the American Friends Service Committee. It was astounding to me that a faith can be built on so much good. So much works in the world. I was raised Catholic and I didn't know much at all about how the church did work in the world until literally starting as a fellow for the American Friends Service Committee, working in coalition in the faith community, and it was my own faith. My turning point when I decided I was a friend, not just someone who appreciates Quakerism. I had health issues that I was, as a good man, burning in the purpose and the work. I just need an extra 100 meetings and I'd pass criminal legal system reform. It got to a point where everything was too much. The work of ending mass incarceration, too great. And my personal troubles would hide no more. Senior leadership at FCNL told me that I was not doing well. And it culminated in the General Secretary at the time, Diane Randall, sitting and worshiping with me. I saw God's love in the faces of everyone around me at FCNL. One of my reasons for being a friend is faith as a verb, not noun. It's about meaning, yes, but just as important as living Jesus's and God's love in the world by doing good. I encourage you to lean into that good every day. I saw the whole country come out and demand better after the murder of George Floyd during a once-in-a-100-year pandemic. I see young people erect encampments to demand a free Palestine. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I participated and donated to pay Black mothers bail so they could be with their families during the holidays. There's so many examples of people living God's love on a daily basis. And we have to believe that we will make a better world if we do what makes us come alive in the words of Howard Thurman. The world we seek is within our reach if we keep striving for it. Now I'm going to leave you with a query. How do you see faith as a verb to help build a better world? How does God speak in your life, guiding your work towards justice?
I'm gonna close us out with thinking about that word toward in the title of our talk, toward a just democracy. As Jose just talked about, our democracy has never been just. We're not trying to reclaim something that used to exist. We're trying to create something that's new. The divine stream is always moving. And that can be really scary. Fear of the unfamiliar can feel a lot like fear that threatens. We need to work with our fear and find courage and step into that unknown. Our democracy radiates outward from ourselves into our communities and our society. It is only as just as the people who are involved in its creation and evolution. In our lobbying, FCNL holds on to what many of you might be familiar with. We talk about the we seeks that sort of set out this vision for where we're trying to go. In some ways, that's akin to what we're trying to do with our democracy. Trying to say, here are these ideals. Here's where we want to head. Where are the things that we can do to move us closer to that, imperfect though they are, to bring us one step in that direction. Our democratic system, just like our faith and practice as friends, grew out of people's experiences and revelations and beliefs, creating a world out of philosophy and imagination. And some parts of it have proved resilient and useful and worth keeping. And it's all built by humans with our limited understandings and capacities to interpret what we see of God, and also our flaws and our blind spots and our prejudices. So we need to recognize the parts that are true, that have merit and that serve, and use that as a basis for our continuing evolution and revelation. Who doesn't the current movement work for? Who is centered? Who is excluded and why? Whose power is not recognized? How does love for all our neighbors show up and flow through that system, and where is it stifled? How are we not just adding people to a table that is already broken, but creating a whole new gathering place, maybe an oasis? So while you're thinking about tomorrow, the next day, the next week, and beyond, you're centering yourself and finding spiritual nourishment, considering your part in this unfolding story, engaging in this practice of love for all your neighbors and yourself. looking with clear eyes at all the problems in our democracy and still finding ways to hope. As we close and return to a time of worship, we invite you to consider these queries. What would a just democracy centered in love for all our neighbors look like? What part will you play in bringing it about?
Friends, thank you so much. And thank you for being here, for making this time possible. This is the time when we get to enter into true conversation. We are curious for your questions for the speakers. For friends here in the room, we ask you to write your questions on an index card that was given to you when you came in, and someone will collect them. For friends online, as you are led, please feel free to write questions and send them to the Pendle Hill Q&A Zoom, I don't know, Zoom identity. And we invite you to share questions that will clarify what you've heard or questions that seek to learn more about something that has been shared. And we realize that not all of our questions will be answered tonight, so we'll spend the time that we have together and then continue learning in the days that come. The choreography here is a little funny, but I think what we're gonna do is I'm gonna ask the questions for friends in the room. Lucas will ask questions that come in online, and then maybe when you are, each of you, if you answer a question, if you wanna stand while you're speaking, because that'll work. I'm sorry? Yeah, so I think that should be good. We already have a couple questions.
So simple.
Oh, yeah. Great question to start us off. For those who do not know, what are the We Seeks?
I was afraid you were gonna ask me. Okay. We seek a world free of war and the threat of war. We seek a society with equity and justice for all. We seek a community where every person's potential may be fulfilled, and we seek an earth restored. Okay, now I've got my FCNL like gold star.
Those are the FCNL
It's our vision statement.
statement. Okay.
Yeah.
I had a question while we're waiting for folks to write. I was thinking about how the stories we tell are shaped by the sources that give us our realities. And I'm curious, tomorrow and moving forward, are there any particular news sources or other sources that you all look to shape the reality that shapes your stories?
Yeah, okay. Might be slightly problematic, but hear me out.
Oh, it's got one out.
So,
There
we go. So.
Yes.
Okay. So this might sound like bad advice, but give it a second. I feel like media can be sometimes limiting because a lot of voices and stories aren't rising to the top and don't get shared. I like following certain Black creators, like Black women. Raquel Martin, she's a psychologist, she has really great stuff. Conscious Lee, he's a great account on Instagram as well. I think sometimes seeking out Black creators gives you a really great and refreshing perspective. But I'm also not saying to swear off traditional media, like definitely still read the Philly Inquirer, Washington Post, New York Times, but also just diversify where you get your source of information in addition to seeking out Black creators, Black intellectuals. Ta-Nehisi Coates came out with an excellent book, which I'm looking forward to reading. So yeah, I would say look at a lot of different places. Social media can be good for that. A lot of voices that are left out can rise to the top as well.
And I will say that. Yeah. I'll say, thank you so much, and we will be sending out a follow-up email on Friday, where we'll list out some of the resources that are mentioned here, so if you didn't catch all those names, we'll try to get them and share them out to you.
We have one friend online who was struck by the fact that voting is still not equally accessible, and they're wondering about ways in their life that they can help to make voting more available to everyone.
So going back to my comment about we're very decentralized, seek out local organizations who are doing this work in your community. The League of Women Voters is phenomenal when they do work in every state. Also ACLU has some good resources because a lot of this is done at the state and local level, so the legislatures have considerable power in how they administer elections. So I would say look for those organizations in your communities and your states, because they can give you a lot of, kind of like what we do at FCNO. We give you a lot of great insight, a lot of good policy that you're not going to find on CNN.com. They'll really know what you can do in your communities, right in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for instance.
We heard a mention of how governmental spaces are actually often even designed to be intimidating. The question is, how might we present ourselves and create space for everyone that is open to engagement and love? Maybe where do you see these spaces being created that do feel more accessible and open to engagement?
I mean, I mentioned FCNL Spring Lobby Weekend. And I think it's those sorts of spaces where it's not expected that you already know everything. So I think part of it is creating opportunities to learn about the systems and to sort of peel some of that intimidation away from it. I mean, when I do lobby trainings for middle schoolers, I say, have you ever tried to get your parents to let you stay up past your bedtime? And almost everyone says yes. And I said, great, you've lobbied. I think sometimes the vocabulary can be part of the issue. And so some of it is like, you know, like I was sort of thinking about the word love, like how do you sort of put other language on it that makes it more familiar and as something that you do as part of your regular life.
this is actually for both of you. You mentioned a little bit about kind of a moment of overwhelm or burnout, but I think, I imagine doing this work, both of you have navigated the challenges of overwhelm in this work. And question is, how do you stay grounded and restore yourself recovering from burnout?
I feel like, I mean, Jose mentioned this, the FCNL community is amazing. Our staff, but also the many people who are part of it, and that includes many of you here. I think part of why I've been there for so long is because it is a place that has allowed me to get married, have two children, figure out how to have a career and not feel like I had to choose. And that's pretty rare. And so I think some of it is a recognition that, you know, we are in this for the long haul. One of the articles and sources that I read and looked at while I was preparing for this was an article written by Ed Snyder, who was the second executive secretary of FCNL. In 1982, he talks about an article called Sustaining the Peacemaker. And he talks about all of the ways that you can build, you know, work on anger and fear and all these things that don't really sustain you. And then he talks about the kinds of things that do. And I feel like that's what the sort of long-term work and community does, is create a place where you can be a person and also do this work. My bio was mentioned, I'm a yoga teacher. I became a yoga teacher a year and a half ago. And part of why I did that was because I needed a place to do spiritual work that wasn't Quakers. And there's a lot of overlap, I feel like, in that. So I think some of it too is being able to figure out what nurtures you and not feel like it has to be the thing you think it's supposed to be.
Well said.
So,
In my family, we have some folks who are very biblical, so I'm gonna ground this in
some scripture. Philippians 4:8 says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about
such things. So
find what makes you come alive, find what brings you joy, do that. I made the atrocious mistake of prior to coming to FCNL thinking that watching C-SPAN was fun all the time.
too much C-SPAN is bad for you. So find things that bring you joy and tap into that. You have to be able to leave the ugliness of the struggle, because there's a lot of beauty in community, but these systems can be pretty ugly. So you have to be able to just tap out and take a break. For me, it's family. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, before getting married, I became a sneakerhead for the first time as an adult. And it just brings me a ton of joy to like find out facts about, and if my friends see this, they're probably gonna judge me for not having this fact correct, but like the flu game, the Jordan 12 that came out in 1997, when Michael Jordan was sick and he like was playing in the playoffs, like facts like that really make me happy and get excited. Like I just bought my first pair of Jordan 4s, a shoe that originally came out in 1989, but it's an amazing pair of shoes. I highly recommend it. Just find a way, whatever like brings you joy and peace. And for me, it's sneakers in my family. Like, I feel really good when I talk about sneakers in the family. So just joy.
This is for Jose. A friend says, I had no choice ethically but to vote third party this election. Can you speak to the need or role of a third party and how it might be funded?
So the this is really tricky, right? We're not simply dealing with carried interest tax deductions or how, we're deciding on food inspectors, like people being killed. People are being killed in Gaza. And the American machinery is to blame for that. We've sent something in the order of $50 billion to Israel. And we supply those weapons. So I think it's important to respect people who are acting out of that because people are being killed. And what I try to remind myself is whoever sits atop of this system is gonna need a lot of accountability. Is gonna need a lot of just push from us. We have to be involved, we have to be engaged. The way that I've heard people speak to this, I think intelligently, is we unfortunately only have two options. That's what we have right now. And we either have to make a choice for things getting, and I don't want to sound partisan, well, I guess I'm not really working for enough, I can't be a little bit partisan, but one side is going to be objectively bad. And in many ways, if you look at some of the proposals, if you look at some of the statements made, and I'll stick with the genocide in Gaza because that's the easiest to touch on. Trump has said about Netanyahu, do whatever you need to do. Like, there's absolutely no nuance, no care for life, no respect for Palestinian people. And when you look at that, you have to make a very difficult decision. And I think that's what a lot of people are faced with. Now, in the long term, I just spoke about the very near term. In the long term, we should do a lot to change our systems of representation. We are unrepresented by the options that are available to us, meaning about the two-party system, and we need to expand that. We need to do more in that regard. And this is me speaking as a private citizen. It's not something that friends have called on us to work on, but just me as a private citizen, I believe that we need to do more to expand what is available to us as far as options. Another thing that I'll say is, I think that there's more attention that needs to be made to the roughly 542 people that write the laws. It's not just about the president. I think that who sits atop the administrative state is important. From everything from food inspections to how student loans are negotiated and how we discharge debt. There's a lot of choice and a lot of little things that don't get talked about, we don't think about. That's important to think about, and that's why you need somebody with integrity sitting atop that system. But Article 1 powers in the Constitution were vested with Congress, and Congress has the most power to make a lot of the changes that we need to have happen. And that's why I hope that you join us doing work with us here now, because that's what we do every single day.
Still no questions from our friends online. Please don't be shy. Feel free to send a message to, how are you titled? Q&A. We're excited to hear from you. Another question from a friend here. We have seen lots of issues at local electoral systems. Would you be more comfortable with a more central government control of the system? How can we have the safety of good local control to avoid the central control by billionaires?
So this is tricky, right? I'm not advocating for there being more centralized control and more local control. What I'm saying is what we currently have is working. And maybe something like elections, something a little more centralized could be more beneficial. I'm not certain. I think that What we have now is virtually very little conversation about it, about what needs to change. One way that we could start, and it seems more centralized, but this could also operate at the local level, is small donor financing. So allowing for public money, people to direct public money. So instead of you taking from your bank account, from your credit card, donating to a campaign, you can say, go into the IRS website and direct some money to candidates that you support. So it's a private citizen doing that. It gives you more power because you have money that isn't coming out of your expenses, and it gives you more of a voice. I'm not saying that that's instantaneously going to cure the problem of a billionaire being able to spend $200 million on a campaign, or being really close friends with the Supreme Court justice by bringing him on your yacht. But that's one really good solution. I think more and more people are becoming aware of how fractured, ineffective, unfair, and oppressive our system of elections is, and we're moving, I hope, in the right direction. And that's one example. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. That's obviously like you can fill up whole classrooms, a whole semester on just that topic alone. But I can leave you with that one example of how you could have something more central at the state and local, at the federal and local state level that could work to balance power in favor of just regular people.
I just want to add something in favor of decentralization. I mean, I think that often the way that especially, it's sort of a truism that the best bet is that Congress won't do anything. And sometimes that's good, but the federal system intentionally moves pretty slowly. And so often the innovations that wind up trickling up through the system come from state and local government. And in some ways we have, 50 states and however many local governments running these experiments in different ways. And then the things that work can rise up. And so there is some advantage in having local autonomy with some guardrails to innovate. I'll just say I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and in our city elections, you can vote at 16. And we've had young people running for office in the city council at a pretty young age. And so, there are things like that would maybe not be possible if everything was mandated from the top, but I think it's figuring out how to have the balance of oversight without stifling that kind of creativity.
A friend has a question about the collective work that exists and what collective work exists that can be done to lift up those who cannot currently vote, such as incarcerated peoples.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if it's 2 states or 1 state. I believe Vermont, you can vote while you are incarcerated.
In Pennsylvania, you can also.
Oh, in Pennsylvania as well. Oh, great. I'll go back and encourage you to look at local organizations and states that are doing the work. Similar to actually now. The organizations that focus on issues dealing with people who are incarcerated, dealing with Black women, that you can lift up in your work with advocating with state representatives, federal representatives. So you can learn from those organizations that are doing that work every day. ACLU again comes to mind. The Equal Justice Initiative, trying to abolish the death penalty, also comes to mind. Florida is a really interesting example as well. If you look at, I'm blanking on their name, but Desmond is the leader, and they work to re-enfranchise individuals who are formerly incarcerated. I think the Florida Rights Restoration Council is called. So their organization, Just Leadership is another organization. They work with formerly incarcerated people to place them in organizations to do work. You can learn from people who are proximate to that pain, and you can use your privilege as someone who can vote or someone who has means to advance issues that they also care about. And you can also open up doors, join an advocacy team at FCNL, and then invite them to lobby with you. Just because maybe if you're disenfranchised doesn't mean that you can't lobby and advocate for issues as well. You can advocate and partner with people who are dealing with these problems in society.
Thank you so much. Thank you, friends, for sharing your questions. Do either of you have any final words you want to share?
I would just say don't get weary, don't get tired. Take breaks, it's important, but just continue to live God's love in this world and in our society, and just keep striving to form a better nation as good as its ideals. And please join with us to do that work. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much to both of you, and thanks to all for joining our experiment in spiritual learning community. As I mentioned, the recording of this event and other Pendle Hill offerings are available on our YouTube channel. It's at Pendle Hill USA on YouTube. In addition to our daily 8:30 a.m. hybrid worship here, tomorrow this room will be open until 6 p.m. all day as a spiritual grounding space. You can also find additional worship spaces that FCNL has put together on their website. On Saturday, November 9th, after our worship, our friend in residence, Jennifer Kavanaugh, will be leading another spiritual grounding workshop called Rebuilding a More Peaceful Society on Zoom. You can find more information about that on our website, along with all of our other upcoming offerings at pendlehill.org/learn. Later this week, you'll receive an email with a link to the transcript and recording and other upcoming opportunities at Pendle Hill. And we really encourage you to continue to stay involved with us. If there are lectures you would love to see us offering here, if there's learning you want to do with us, please don't hesitate to share your thoughts with me or Lucas or Maddie. And we look forward to continuing to show up together, regardless of the results tomorrow. So with that, I'll invite us to a closing moment of worship.